Well, hello folks, and welcome to episode 248 of Retropower Uncut. And I hope I've got the episode right. Jamie's just told me, so I've had at least 5 seconds to forget it, but I think I got it right. So you join us in the fabrication workshop at Retropower, and there are people in here because I haven't done the video at lunchtime today. So you can see stuff going on. I think Stu's just giving Scott a quick hand on this. On the E-Type, we are getting towards the tail end, literally, of the exhaust job on this, and I think it was mentioned last week possibly. There's been some discussion in terms of the tailpipe assembly and the original style, various other styles. You'll have to wait and see to see the final one, but Scott's getting very, very close to it being the final one now. He's just fighting a few battles at the moment. There are so many welds. I mentioned this in previous weeks. There is so much weld in that exhaust system. Every time you do one of those welds, it will shrink and pull the pipe in a slightly different direction. And one of the difficulties he's now fighting is with the amount of weld, those pipes are pulling around a little bit, and he's just trying to get things absolutely level, absolutely central, and everything dead right on the back of the car. And a tiny, tiny shrink further forward here on a weld will move that tailpipe up and down by, say 6 or 8 millimeters, which is massively visible. So it's very critical to get all of these welds exactly right, and I don't just mean right as in a nice weld, but to get them so that all of the shrinkage has occurred, so that the pipes are exactly in line. And Scott's just been doing a bit of battling on that, encouraging a few areas to shrink to get things to level up and that sort of caper. So there's quite a lot of stuff that's not the immediately obvious. Oh yes, I'll put a nice weld around this piece of stainless steel. That's great. That's all very good and that's all beautifully done. But then there's some of the bits where we might need to rerun over a little bit of weld to cause it to shrink a bit more, just to pull things exactly level. So there's a bit of that sort of fun and games going on. But we're pretty much getting there now. Scott's pretty much got it all buttoned up. So we've got the 4 pipes under the diff, 4 1 3/4 inch pipes under the diff carrier, which keeps us with a suitable amount of ground clearance there. They're going back down to 2.5 inch bore bullet type boxes, because we were going to go with more silencing than that at the back, but it just doesn't look right. So we've gone down to this size now, and then the next stage will be putting 2 more collectors, but not collectors, there'll be spreaders back in here now to spread that to 4 individual outlets, and then the tailpipe assembly. Which brings me neatly on to making of collectors. I'm kind of hoping Scott's got some bends lying around so I can show you. Have you got a couple of bends kicking around? Oh, in the box. Aha. Well, what I'm going to do is quickly show the viewers how one would go about. Well, I'm trying to do some interesting asides on our videos, and it occurred to me that a lot of people watching this video who aren't in the business of making exhausts will probably not really know the easy way of making a merge collector. To do it, you use 2 45-degree or less bends. I think these are these 25s, these bends? I think they are, aren't they? I think these are 25 degree, these bends. I'm just trying to look now. Yeah, they're 25 degree bends. So that makes for a more gradual collector. If you use 2 25 degree, up to 45 degree, that makes for a sharper collector. But basically, use 2 bends. These are obviously stainless steel. We're doing a stainless steel system. You then work out what separation you want your 2 pipes to be on. So what gap you need between the pipes. And then if you take half of that gap, add it onto your pipe diameter. So you've got the diameter plus half the gap, and you set a height gauge to that, set that pipe up on a surface against a V-block, so that's a 90 degree block, sorry, not a V-block. So you can set that pipe up so that it's sticking up dead vertical like that, and then you use the height gauge to scribe around that pipe exactly at the diameter plus half the gap, scribe around there all the way around. Same with the other pipe, set it up against the block to keep it vertical, use the height gauge, scribe around that one, again, pipe diameter plus half the gap, and then we bandsaw them off in the vertical bandsaw, feed them through the vertical bandsaw and cut them off along that line around the pipe, and that will get you 2 pieces that you then put together like that, and we'll basically come to a point there. You then TIG weld all the way around the outside of that, the top and bottom, so that they're now 1 piece. And once you've done that, you then work out the diameter that you need your for your pipe that you're going to put onto the collector, the outlet pipe of the collector, or inlet on a splitter like we're doing there, but the outlet pipe of the collector, you work out what the circumference of that is, and then you work out the exact point up that joined point of those two pipes where that circumference would be the same. And if you then cut that joined tapered looking pipe with those two joined together, if you cut that at the point where that circumference is exactly the same as the circumference of the round pipe that you're putting on, and then you slightly overlise the pipe that's going onto that collector and then TIG weld the two together. Before you TIG weld that on, but after you've cut that off on that point where the circumference is correct, you can then get inside that collector and you then TIG weld the inside of the point where the two pipes meet, and that gives a really smooth transition inside and makes it very nice for the gas that's flowing through. What I should also add is when you're TIG welding the outside of that collector, back purge it with argon on the inside so that the inside of all your welds are nice and clean, there's no crystallization of the stainless on the inside. But that's the key, is you cut them together at the separation you want using a height gauge to mark on a straight scribe line on both of those, cut them in the bandsaw, TIG weld them together on the outside with a purge, cut the top where the circumference of the tapered section is the same as the circumference of the outlet pipe that you're trying to add onto it, and then overlise the inlet end of the outlet pipe to that collector and TIG weld it all together. And that's how you make collectors. I would show you a finished one, but I can't. There's the cut off piece as an example. So that's the end piece of one of those collectors that Scott's cut off. So the circumference of this section here is sort of figure of 8 section. The circumference of that, he's cut that at the point where that circumference matches the outlet pipe, and then he'll slightly tap these bits up with a hammer and then squash the outlet pipe to match that shape, and then TIG weld the whole lot together. And that's how you make a merge collector. And interestingly, another point to show up on camera, that's what the inside of the weld will look like if you purge it. That's not got quite full penetration on that, but that's how clean it'll look on the inside if you purge that correctly with argon. You don't get any of that blackening on the inside, which causes problems if you don't purge it from the outside. When you try and weld the inside of the collector to get that smooth transition between the pipes, if you try and weld that inside and you haven't purged it, there'll be a lot of, looks like coal. It's basically oxidized stainless steel on the inside, crystallized, and it's very, very hard to weld, and it becomes a mess, basically. So if you purge it with argon on the inside, then it keeps it all clean, it all welds beautifully. So anyway, there we go. I thought I'd give you an aside on that because you've seen quite a lot of E-Type exhaust being made, so I thought we'd go off on a slight tangent and look at how we make a particular part of that exhaust. Other work on the E-Type, I've been doing a bit of work on the front end on the water system, which Jamie will be able to find a couple of bits of B-roll for this. He probably doesn't know this at the moment, but I've got a couple of bits of CAD, and our Concept 303, one of our CNC guys, Andy, he's actually machined, I believe this morning, the water elbow, or the water outlet flange effectively, that's going to bolt onto the water pump on the V12 and enable us to then fabricate a pipe that goes from there down to the outlet side of the water to oil heat exchanger in the sump. That would be a standard Jaguar part, but it's not, for two reasons. One, we need to change the outlet of the water pump, and we're using the later type water pump from a 6-litre X300 Jaguar engine. But also, we need to change the routing of that pipe to clear, rewinding a few weeks when we looked at the oil system and we determined that we were going to feed the oil in at the front of the block like the E-Type V12 does, but not through the standard E-Type arrangement because we can't fit that. We need to be able to get an oil line in through the front of the block, and it has to go through the middle of the air conditioning compressor belt run, through the middle of the belt run. In order to do that, I need to put the oil line through the space that the water elbow is normally through. So we've been doing some work, I've been doing a bit of work on in CAD, working out how to do that, shape that pipe for that water elbow. We've got a plan, it all fits, so there's no point me doing any more CAD. It's now at the stage where Andy's machine, Concept 303, has machined the flange, and we will then weld, and Scott will then section up aluminium tube and TIG weld it all together to form that feed pipe, which is the water inlet to the water pump on the V12, which takes the water from the outlet of the engine oil cooler. So that's what's been going on the E-Type. Moving on, we've not got Bobby this week. Bobby is over in Bulgaria this week. He's on a bit of a holiday, stroke sorting some things out with his family, seeing his family. So he's over in Bulgaria. He sent me a message the other day saying it was, I think it was 44 degrees C in the shade. So it's kind of warm over there at the moment. I have to say, much as I like it to be a bit sunny, it's probably a bit warm for being in a fabrication workshop. But so Bobby actually did a couple of things on this Saab the tail end of last week that weren't in last week's video. But next week I'll get Bobby to do his bit on the video again, because I think that's been going very well. I think that's been quite well received, and it's nice to have somebody else talking as well as me, from my point of view and undoubtedly yours. Moving on from that, Jamie's kind of just reminded me that I need to mention the scimitar. Now, there's not been a drastic change other than it obviously has its body back on now. You remember the chassis, I did the modification work on the chassis to get a bit more space for the seats and a bit more space for the pedals, which we've done. As I say, that's all stuff that was expected, understood at the very beginning, likely to need to happen. We just weren't sure. And rather than trying to speculate at the beginning and try and put those design modifications in for Sport Motive to do when they made the chassis, we decided it would be easier to retrospectively modify rather than have to remake, or rather than have to alter all of their tooling to be able to do the chassis. So anyway, long and short of that is that's now done. And the body is screwed back on very loosely, just a simple set of self-tapping screws into the chassis in the same position it was in before. Engine and gearbox is dropped in basically on its wooden blocks, exactly where it was before. And the wheels are very, very crudely aligned to be pointing in the right direction within half a degree or so. So that next week, when we have the visit from Solid Print, who are coming on Monday, two of their guys I believe, are visiting. Solid Print are a fairly local company to us. They're in Kenilworth. They supplied the scanner that we have at the moment, which we bought back in 2021, tail end of 2021, and it has been an absolutely invaluable to the point of we couldn't have done a lot of the work we've got around us now without that scanner. It's immense. I'll show you some in a minute, in fact, that we've done using that scanner. But moving on, we have the need for a bit more accuracy and a bit more speed, and we think that we could justify what is quite a large expenditure on the grounds of enhanced speed and accuracy. The accuracy effectively coming back to speed as well, in that we're having to substitute the accuracy of the scan by more CAD work at the moment. If we can make the scans better, we won't need to do so much CAD work to make the data points completely usable. So on Monday, Solid Print will be visiting with their OinScan Libra scanner, which we had a very brief demo of some months ago, and I was incredibly impressed by it. But at the time, we weren't really looking at that scanner because it was quite a step up in terms of financial outlay. However, I've done a bit of mental pondering, and I think that despite this significant financial outlay, it would probably make sense to get it, assuming that the savings in time are what I suspect they will be. So one of the things we're going to find out on Monday is whether those time savings are real and whether they are what we think they are. And to that end, we've got quite a chunk of work to hit with it, just to see how we get on. I can't really, so far in our experience with them, I can't praise Solid Print highly enough. They've been extremely supportive, very helpful. They stock good products that work and support them. I'm sure I would be able to buy the same products from somewhere else, possibly slightly more cheaply, but then I wouldn't just be able to pick up the phone and say, how does this work? How do you do this? And one of their very experienced guys would say, oh, you just do this. I'll put you on a video call, let's do it. And that's the situation with Solid Print. If we can't do something, they'll just do us a video call, show us how to do it. Absolutely faultless. It's really good to work with, really good company, and hopefully we can work together on getting this new scanner in place. But the first step will be doing this scan work on Monday to establish whether things are as I remember them from the very, very brief demo that we did before. So that's enough on scimitar. We're not going to go further into Saab. That leads us on to me drinking another swig of espresso. Roundstone espresso, doing my sales bit there. But they do sponsor us an awful lot of coffee, so I should be very thankful for my coffee. It also wakes me up a little bit. Last night was a rather late shift on house renovation, followed by several child wake-ups. So I'm working on about 4 hours sleep, I think, at the moment. So it's not a good one. But moving on to BMW, Stu has obviously been very busy. As you can see, there's a quarter panel here that is now more or less one quarter panel. There's a lot of black paint on it at the moment because Stu's using that to pick up the highs and lows. And he's basically going through doing the metal finishing on this, getting all of the weld lines chased back and flattened out and sorted out. They're not too bad anyway, to be fair. There's a little bit of a sink line down the weld line there. There's a few little gremlins around here, but generally it's pretty good. So he's getting all of that metal finished as far as he can, which is, there's not too far to go on that. A bit of tidying up of the swage line, a few bits and bobs, but nothing too drastic. Just to rewind for those who might be watching this video for the first time, I'm aware there might be one or two of you, this quarter panel has been pieced together from the upper part of an original BMW E9 quarter, the lower forward quarter repair section from Walloth and Nesh, a wheel arch repair section from Walloth and Nesh, and a rear quarter lower repair section from Walloth and Nesh. So it's 3 repair panels plus a BMW panel, all cut together and TIG welded together, TIG butt welded together. So I covered about that welding last week, so I'm not going to go into detail on that this week. We're going to look at something else on a little detail bit this week of interest, which is that the back of this wing is basically scrap. The surround to this light has been crashed at least once and rusted, and there's rust holes through the bodywork, and the back corner's been crashed and corroded away pretty badly as well. So the whole lot is pretty much scrap. So we need to remake all this lot. Stu's got a prop, which I can show you in a minute. We'll show that in just a sec. But Stu, thank you, Stu. Stu's just brought me his one of his sections he's made, one of his rather nice sections he's made. So, presented with this problem, there are a number of ways to attack it. What we don't have is a good wing to copy, and what we're not sure of is the accuracy of the remains of this wing. We've lost the corner points in several fairly vital areas, so we don't actually know what shape some of this should be. We know what we think it might be, and we know it's got to fit a light in it, and we've got a light so we can check that that fits, and we can make assumptions. We know there's a straight line down this panel from there to there, but within 4 millimeters, 3 or 4 millimeters, we don't really know where that should be. And problems like that can set you up for a lot of issues later on. So, we do have a new old stock quarter panel for the offside of the car. So, wisely using technology that we have, George scanned the offside new old stock rear quarter panel, and then very, very, very quickly, in the matter of less than an hour's work, got that set up in, well, in terms of the CAD input to that. There's a bit more time involved in getting the scan done and the print. But in terms of the CAD side of things, this was done, I believe, George might enlighten this on the video, but I believe this was all done within the Peel CAD software, within the Peel scan software, should I say. The scan was taken of the offside wing and then mirrored in the scan software and then exported to 3D print. So we have a near side quarter rear shape actually made as a mirror of the offside rear quarter shape, so that Stu has then got a shape to work from for making the corner repair sections for this quarter panel. Now, you could do this as a solid plastic section that was hard enough to actually jig chase these shapes into. You could actually chase them into that with a hard nylon chaser, but that shape there doesn't really lend itself for chasing, not without a lot of complication, which I'm not going to go into. That doesn't really lend itself to being made that way. That does, but you would need the plastic to be much stronger than this. This is just PLA, which wouldn't be strong enough to chase that into. But what it does do is give us a buck to then hand shape the pieces into. So the next stage on from that is Stu's made, to make the upper piece here, Stu's made a flexible shape pattern from the other quarter panel, I believe, using this tape. Now, Ray Schelin, W-R-A-Y, Schelin, S-C-H-E-L-I-N. If you've never come across his stuff, I imagine a lot of our audience have, but Ray Schelin in the USA has done several videos on making flexible shape patterns, and they're a very good way of patterning a part, A, where you might need to mirror the pattern, and B, where you need it to be very accurate and take on a shape and confirm some 3D nature to a shape. It's basically using fiberglass reinforced sticking tape, which is used as packaging tape for tough, on heavy duty packaging. It doesn't stretch because it's got the fiberglass in it. It has absolutely no stretch to it. So if you make a pattern with it, it stays the right size. It doesn't change. So you stick that tape onto the panel in a crisscross fashion, onto a good panel, in a crisscross fashion, and then you can peel that off and it won't change shape, and it retains the 3D nature of the panel. So you can actually offer it over the final part, demonstrated on this, you can actually offer it over the final part, and it will tell you when you're pretty close to the right shape, because there won't be gaps underneath it, it'll fit quite well. So it gets you pretty close to a final shape. And it also, you can squash it down flat, close enough, obviously it will have looseness, put an offset on the outside of it a little bit, and it will get you pretty close to the basic rough pattern to actually cut your piece of steel out to start with as well. So he's done a flexible shape pattern to establish the overall shape and give him some guidance. He's then got the 3D print for the actual final shape, then started making. So started making the upper section to make this piece, flat pattern developed from the section, wheeled initially to form this curvature in the middle. There's a compound curvature on the center section. So that's where you start. You basically wheel your initial patterned piece of steel to the curvature of that section on the English wheel. You stretch that, possibly a little bit of shrink around the edges here and there, but you basically stretch what's like almost like a quarter of a football sort of shape. It's not quite, but basically a part sphere effectively into a piece of flat steel to get that shape initially. Then you put on these two lines using either a Jenny, a bead roller, or the English wheel. Now Stu actually put these creases on in the English wheel. He fed that piece through and used the corner of the upper wheel to put those corners into that. So he's marked them on the piece and then pushed that through. Bear in mind these pieces were up here at that point. These were just a continuation of this central curve. So he then put that through the English wheel to put those two crease lines in and tipped it over to tip those edges over. At that point these will go frilly because there's excess length there. They need shrinking. So that would have gone frilly and wavy and bottle cap. That would have done a beer bottle cap. It would have gone wavy down there. Now you can remove those tucks or those waves in a number of ways. One, you can stump shrink it onto a wooden stump, but on a small piece like this that can get quite tricky. Another way is use a shrinker. Another way is use a tucking iron, put tucks into it and then hammer the tucks out. Various ways of doing it. Stu's used a pneumatic shrinker because that has an enormous amount of shrinking power and could easily shrink those two sides even to that depth, no problem at all. The downside to that is when you shrink that, it can tend to invert this curve, which actually happened. So he's had to do some further work beating that curve back out. But basically that gets you those edges turned over to the angles they've got to be at and gets you into the point where you're then working with a hammer and dolly and an anvil to do all the final shaping. So it's putting that flick onto that one where the quarter radius is out there. It's getting that radius shape there and getting all the curvature right, and all the time trial fitting that over. I'm not going to be able to fit this in the right place there. All the time trial fitting that over the 3D print to make sure that it's fitting correctly. I'm putting it in slightly the wrong place here, but basically offering that over the 3D print to check that you've not got too much of a gap under it. So that's making the top section. Then he's made this corner section, which is the piece that goes in there for the boot lid to shut into. Again, pattern the blank on paper or card, hammer that out from a piece of flat steel. Sounds easier to do than it is. Stu's extremely good at this sort of work, so it's I'm much less good, but basically mark out all your various lines onto your paper pattern, transfer all those lines onto the steel, and then basically just a hammer and the anvil and put all those lines in. A couple of these lines you could put in on the bead roller or a Jenny to mark them on to start with, and then it's just hammer work. Making a piece like that is just hammer and dolly and anvil work. Once that's done, the final piece is making the light aperture, which is making some progress with now. This is made in two pieces. So he initially wheeled a flat piece of steel to the shape of the back of the quarter, as if it didn't have the light aperture in it, marked the light aperture on, and then chased a 90-degree edge onto the edge of the light aperture. Now that's a critical point. Once that line's in, it's very hard to move. There's a number of ways of doing that. You can either chase that in as a hard edge to start with, which is a bit poo or bust. You put the line in and it's very hard to move. Or you can chase that line in using a ball-ended hammer and put a broader radius line in on that corner till you're happy with where it is, and then you can sharpen it up. Now I don't know which way Stu did this one. I would tend to go with putting a radiused corner in round there using a ball-ended hammer to get that corner in and then sharpen it up. Now I know Pete Tomasini is a good example. If you've watched his videos, if you don't, I strongly suggest you do. He's probably one of the most capable metal shapers I've ever watched. He's in Australia. Hello Pete, if you're watching. He's an expert in that sort of thing, and it's very good to watch. He will put a radiused corner in, beat that in with a ball-ended hammer of some description, and then sharpen that radius up, and that gives you a few millimeters that you can tidy that line up as you go around there. But anyway, either way, you put that corner in, and then Stu's basically folded an angled section to make the base piece of this, and then shrunk that round that corner. You can just keep shrinking to pull that all the way around there. Made that as an angled section, so it overlapped up inside there. So your angle on this piece was probably 1/2 inch long, your angle on this piece is 1/2 inch long, so they overlap. You can lay one over the other, and you set the depth correctly for the light with them overlaid over each other, then scribe round the edge of one to the other, trim it off on that line, and then TIG weld the two together as a butt weld, and there you go, you have your piece. That still needs quite a bit of work, trimming in, tidying up, and getting all the curvature exactly right to match that piece at the top, obviously something along those lines, and the corner piece around the corner. But yeah, a lot of waffle from me, but hopefully that's enlightened some of you as to how you might go about making some bits like that, and that's what Stu's been working on this week. So I'll stop talking about BMW at that, because we've talked quite a lot about BMW. I'm going to have a swig of coffee again, because I'm not getting any coffee and I'm drying up. Moving on from that, do you want to go, shall I go that side? We'll go over here, because we'll talk a bit about Aston Martin. So Aston DBS progress. Two-pronged attack this week has been the rear panel fitment, which you recall from previous weeks we received from ASR, from Sean and Claire at ASR in Irchester, who have been very, very helpful. Top place. If you need any Aston Martin, DBS, V8, or any other, and for complete Aston Martin restorations. I mean, they've got some beautiful DB3 the last time I was down there being restored. So yeah, if you have any Aston Martin restoration requirements, I strongly suggest talking to Sean and Claire at ASR. Very, very good people. They made the rear panel, which is actually a V8 rear panel, as they were keen to point out, but for what we need, it's absolutely perfect, because the only slight different part to it we wouldn't be using anyway. So we've got that all checked out. We covered this last week, but that all checked out. The back of the car was all good from a geometric point of view. So then Matt's moved on to making the new rear crossmember, which is made from two sections, which are actually three sections, of 2mm thick steel. It's basically a top hat with a bent flange on it. In order to be able to bend that in one length without having to have a joint in the middle, we have to bend it in the press brake, because that's the only thing we have long enough to make that in one piece, because it's more than 4 feet wide and our other folders are only 4 foot. And the press brake couldn't put the reverse fold section on the bottom, so Matt's done that as two sections, and we've spot welded them together, which is fine because it adds a bit more strength to that area anyway, which would be handy to have anyway. So he's made that top hat section for the back, press brake that, welded all that together, and then that's all screwed into place on the car. A lot of the parts on this are being screwed into place at the moment, so that we've got the option to undo or take them off to access things until we absolutely finalise everything, and then they're welded in place. So as you can see in here, floor pans are tacked in place. All the rear bulkhead structure is all completely welded now. The floor pans are only tacked and screwed in place, because Matt's now working on the transmission tunnel, which has been the focus of this week so far. The rear transmission tunnel, which we patterned to match the angle of the prop shaft, and have a nice even clearance to that, and to look quite smart as well. So he's patterned that, bent that up. That's made in 18 gauge steel, bent up to suit, and he's put the nice beads in that to make it look neat and keep some strength into it. Laid that on, trimmed all that into the body. That's all looking really good. And then he's moved on to the front bit, which is the much trickier part. As you can see, he's getting on pretty well with this. Been a couple of to's and fro's on this, because it's actually quite tight in a number of slightly odd areas. It's tight on top of the gearbox there, so we've got about 1/2 inch of clearance to the gearbox just under there, and it's tight on the central part of the gearbox just there. That's a wide point on the gearbox, that side, but not this side. So that bit there, that wide section of the tunnel there, is dictated by a 1/2 inch clearance to the gearbox below it, and I don't really want to go less than 1/2 inch, so that dictates that point there. And then a similar point next to the gear lever this side dictates the width of this part of the tunnel. To keep the tunnel symmetrical, this part has to be the width it is here to clear a piece on the side of the gearbox. And I have to confess to not actually investigating really what it is, other than that it looks important. I don't really know. It's a switch that's on the side of the gear selector housing. I don't think it's just a reverse switch, so I need to look into more what that is. Somebody will tell me I'm being an idiot and that it's really obvious what it is, and I don't know what it is. I need to look, and I'm sure it's something perfectly sensible, but we need to make it clear the transmission tunnel anyway. So that's dictated. They're the criteria. The start to designing any part, any sheet metal bit, is not pick up some sheet metal and start hitting it. That's a big mistake. What you need to do when you start designing something for one of these is work out what your constraints are. Set all your constraints, both in your head and preferably on a bit of paper as well, but certainly in your head. Determine all your constraints, because they are what dictate your design. So the constraints in this case were the height of the gearbox, the width of the gearbox at 2 different places, and then further to that, retaining a flat portion on top just to make our life easier. Luke's done some renderings for the interior design, and whilst there may be refinements done to those and changes done to those, the basic principle will tend to stick, because the customer has seen those and we've all agreed the basic principle is good. And one of the things there is we'll need to be able to mount a centre console along here, and having no flat surfaces does make that more challenging, even with scanning equipment. It's nice if you've just got some flat surfaces somewhere to mount things off. So I wanted a flat, approximately 5-inch wide section down the centre of the tunnel where we've got a flat bit that's easy to datum from, easy to measure from, it's level, and it's easy to put mounting faces onto. So that's why we've got that section there. So that's all the constraints that dictated the shape of that tunnel. Then Matt's cracked on and got all that done, and he's done a very nice job. The next section of that will be just shape this into this rear section. The rear section has just got to be pulled in a couple of places to blend into this. Then he'll scribe the two together. In fact, I think he has scribed it. His next job, which he's gone away at the minute, so he's not making a lot of noise while I'm trying to talk. His next section will be he'll take all this out, he'll tin snip this down this scribe line, clean that up, trial fit the two together on the bench because that's flat, same as this tunnel is, pull them until they're nice and level and all even, then tack it all together and then TIG weld all that together, then DA it all, and that whole piece will then be one nice piece ready to weld in. Can't weld that until we've done the front, and we can't do the front until we've got the bulkhead design finalised, and we can't finalise the bulkhead design until we've mocked the pedal box up and the driving position up. And to that end, we will have a visit from the customer of this car where we are going to do exactly that, and at that point we can finalise the bulkhead design. But further to the bulkhead design, another little job I've been doing is some work on, seemingly irrelevant to this project, for a Jaguar XJ Coupe pedal box for the Portofino project, XJ Coupe, because we're planning to use the same pedal box in this car as well, and converting the automatic pedal boxes to manual. I believe you would have probably seen George Sinclair doing some machining work, because I think that was last week. If not, then we'll probably have some footage this week of George Sinclair doing some machining work on a standard automatic Series 3 or 2 Jaguar XJ series type pedal box, because nearly all of them are autos. The manual ones are very, very, very rare, almost impossible to get hold of now. But with a few fairly simple machining operations, you can turn an auto pedal box into a manual one, but you don't have a clutch pedal. So I've just finished drawing up a clutch pedal to that effect that we can cut on the CNC plasma, and we'll use a steel plate pedal for the clutch, and then we've got a little rear line of the brake pedal to do to line that up with it, and then we'll have a pedal box that we'll be able to use in the Jaguar Portofino project, but we can also use it for mock-up in this project, because we'd kind of like to use the same arrangement in this. For various reasons. We get on quite well with a lot of Jaguar parts. They're very well engineered to start with. They're quite well thought out. There's reasons behind why Jaguar have done a lot of things the way they've done them. And Jaguar parts of that era are generally quite easy to mount. They've generally used flat mountings for things, sensible designs for things, and a lot of the parts are very, very strong as well. So we use quite a lot of Jaguar. When we've got to go to a parts bin, one of the first parts bins we go to would be 1970s and 1980s Jaguar, which will sound strange to some of our viewers from around the world, because 1970s and 1980s Jaguars were not generally widely regarded as the world's most reliable vehicles. But that is sad, because an awful lot of the underpinnings of those cars were extremely well designed. The naysayers generally haven't got into the nitty-gritty detail of the engineering under one of those cars. Yes, they broke down. They broke down because of silly peripheral issues most of the time, and possibly some engines that were below par as well. But that's a kind of worms that'll probably upset a lot of people. But in my opinion, some of the engines were rather below par. But in terms of the engineering of all the suspension components, in terms of the engineering of all the bushings, in terms of the balance between handling precision and noise, vibration and harshness, in terms of the drivetrain component design and strength and ability to withstand vastly more power than they were originally designed to take, and in terms of the quality of engineering of random things like the seat mechanisms that I've mentioned before, and seat belt anchorages, just all sorts of things that Jaguar actually did very, very, very well. And it's one of the reasons why we do go back to the Jaguar parts bin quite a lot, because there's a lot of very good components in them. Anyway, enough of that aside. I've done a lot of asides this week. That's where we're at on the Aston Martin, and I'll briefly touch on the body shop, but there's not a lot to look at in there because it's actually in the paint booth, having just had some primer applied. We mentioned the Golf last week and the rework. That's underway. That's continues. I think Gaz has just got the primer onto that. We've dealing with a couple of other issues on it. So I think we're painting the full both complete sides of that car just to deal with various things on it. And so Gaz has got the primer on that now. I think he's going to block that primer. Then we should be in a position, hopefully in the next couple of days, to get the sealer coat on that and the paint on it. So that'll be a nice position to be in. Nobody likes doing rework, but we do have to put our hands up in the air now and again and say sometimes things go wrong. And yes, it was a lot of years ago, but it's not right, and it's our fault that it's not right. So we're dealing with it. And I think on that note, I'm going to shut up and hand over to Cal and let him take you around the assembly shop. So see you in a week's time.
In this episode of Top Gear. Thank you very much, Nat. We're starting with Project Churchill, and there is some cool stuff going on in respect to this car. So I just saw the custom glass arrive today, the flat glass we've had cut, so custom main door window, quarter light and rear window. The quarter light actually needing to have been custom. We just had it made so it matched everything else and was brand new. But the main door glass and the rear window are obviously custom shaped for the shape of this car, which actually I'll do a quick recap on. If you're not a regular follower of us, this is a Mark II Jaguar that we have reimagined, if you like, as a two-door coupe. So the door is much longer than standard. The roof, although the windscreen is exactly as standard, we've dropped the rear of the roof, we've brought the rear window angle in, we've made custom quarter glass and quarter light shapes here. The whole quarter panel is a custom panel, and consequently it requires custom glass. So that has arrived today. I've also had some little copper plate samples sent through from Derby Plating, who are in the process of doing all the copper plating of all the window frames, which is going to be the final finish on this. Now, for anybody who's ever worked with polished copper, you'll know it tarnishes pretty quickly. It kind of goes dull, then starts to get a green finish on it, and you can polish it up with normal metal polish, Autosol, Brasso, whatever, and it comes up very nicely. But we were pondering trying to create a slightly lower maintenance finish on it. So I don't really want to lacquer it, because there's always the risk with a lacquered finish, although when the lacquer's intact it's perfect. If you get any defects in that lacquer and you get moisture creeping into the hole, you'll get corrosion basically spidering out under the lacquer, and it'll just look a terrible state and then be a nightmare, because you can't just polish it up. You'd have to basically strip the lacquer off, so I don't really want to do that. We're going to try the traditional ceramic coating as used by detailers, which there's definitely an element of snake oil when it comes to that sort of stuff, although it is a very good coating in terms of lasting longer than ordinary car polish. But we're going to try that. We've used that successfully on polished aluminium before, and it definitely works quite well in terms of minimising the surface corrosion. So that'd be one option, and it's relatively easy to strip that off if you ever want to renew it, or if you want to polish the metal in the conventional way again. We're also going to try Cerakote, which we've used various Cerakote products on different things, and it's extremely tough. So there is a clear Cerakote which is specifically designed for polished metals. So we're going to do a sample of that as well, and I'm going to do just a sample of just normal clear lacquer, although I don't want to use that. But my intention is then to leave those samples outside in the elements. I'll probably scratch part of each sample as well back to the copper to just see how it reacts the sort of damaged coating, see how that spreads, because I just want to see how these things react when, whether it's worth trying the coating or whether we're basically going to make things worse as soon as the coating gets damaged in any way. So that's that. And then James has been on this, starting to formulate a plan with the rear seat. So that's really the next phase of interior on this. It's the rear seat design and fabrication, which we're making from scratch. So he's got a bit of a plan now in place. So we're going to do a board for the base of the seat, both sides, a board for the back, custom cut foam on those. I think we're going to 3D print a sculpted piece for the side bolster, if you like, which is the rear wheel arch, which will be a separately fitted panel, and then the parcel shelf will be a separately fitted panel as well. We're going to try and reference the same diamond quilting that we've done on the front seats, probably have a feature seam running across the top corner in the coppery coloured stitch that we've done on the seats. So yeah, really excited to see that start to come together, and I'm entrusting James to use his creative flair, which he's very good at, so I'm excited to see that. That's it for the minute. Project Portofino, largely just components coming back from their surface finishing processes. So we had a big batch of zinc nickel parts come back, things like the window regulator, mechanisms, a whole variety of parts which I can't remember off the top of my head, and a load of Xylan stuff which is largely relating to subframes. So things like the wishbone parts, the brake back plates, I think I've seen the hub flanges in there, numerous parts like that. So there's a variety of finishes we use. Xylan we use where we want the parts to be black, but in a finish that is very hard wearing, but in a finish that doesn't have any significant thickness to it. So usually mating faces, parts that have bolts in, whereas if you use powder coat on those parts, the powder coat basically gets mashed by the bolts, and also the thickness of the paint or powder coat sort of gives over time, and you tend to find fasteners come loose. So we use black Xylan in those instances, although those parts are initially zinc nickeled. So the Xylan itself is not a anti-corrosion coating in an active sense. If the coating is completely intact, it's anti-corrosion, because obviously no moisture or oxygen can get to the metal. But if you damage that Xylan, then it will rust, because there's nothing actively protecting it, whereas zinc protects metal in terms of being a sacrificial anode, so it actually actively prevents corrosion. So we zinc nickel plate the parts first and then Xylan them, so the Xylan gives them the black appearance, but if it gets damaged, there's still corrosion protection there. So that's where we're at with components for that. Sitting behind it, the Morris, we did a little photo shoot of that this week for Fast Car magazine, which takes you back, doesn't it? The word Fast Car magazine. I didn't know until they approached me about that car that they even still existed. And obviously Fast Car in a physical magazine sense disappeared a while ago. But it's been rekindled as a YouTube channel, social media outlet, and they're also doing some shows. So yeah, you can check out their Instagram page. We'll put the link down below now, and also their YouTube channel. And I think they've basically shot a little video for a series called Build Masters in association with G-Technic, where I've done a little walk around some of the details on that car. So keep an eye out for that, coming soon. Walk this way. And over there, I don't know don't know which the best angle is here. Maybe if you come over here, Jamie, and I'll squeeze through here. Camaro. It's been testing George's patience, I will say, this week on the bonnet popper arrangement. Just nothing seems to be wanting to go how we want it to be on those bonnet pins. So we're pretty much there now, but it's been a bit of a pain, to put it mildly. And it all kind of links back into panel alignment, which has always been an absolute curse on this car, trying to get the panels aligned. And it changes as well. If you put the car on stands, it's slightly different to if you put it on its wheels. I mean, it's a lot easier to deal with at the minute than how they were originally, because the bonnet was originally hinged and mounted, the hinges were mounted to the outer wings, which is a ridiculous scenario. So you can't move the adjustment of the outer wing separately to the bonnet, because the two are attached together originally. Now we changed that, which makes it a little easier, than that the bonnet hinges are bolted to a subframe that's hidden under the wings. But yes, we're pretty much there. We've got the little popper arrangements that he fabricated working. Andy's Concept 303 has now machined the little bezels for those, which we've trialled on. They look great. They're ready to be anodized. The pins are basically working. One of the problems we've been battling is that in our infinite desire to do everything to tight cool tight tolerances. The bonnet pins are a bit of a pain because the bonnet comes through an angle. Getting the angle of the pin exactly right such that it passes through the middle of the hole kind of throughout the travel from when the bonnet first meets it to when it's fully in place is tricky. And we've got those billet bezels which have got, the hole is bigger than the pin, but it's only like a mil bigger than the pin, and that's been a bit of a pain. So I think George has basically reamed a slight taper into those, so the hole is slightly bigger in the underside than it is at the top to assist with the pin not scraping through them as the bonnet goes down. But we're pretty much there with that now, and centre console is going back in now, which should be for the final time. We just wanted to do one last thing, which was like a weatherproofing plate around where the shifter comes through, but that's now done. Console's going in for the final time. Bonnet pins are about done. Feel like I'm probably saying the same as I did last week, but I would say this is about ready for getting out on the road. But I'll probably say the same thing next week. Okay, so reversing up slightly. This is exciting. Interceptor, Project Rooster, and it is basically ready to drop on its wheels. I think I'm right in saying there might be one wheel bearing that's not been done. No, all the wheels are on, so I think perhaps that is ready to drop down. So Toby has been working furiously on this week after we received loads of parts back from Plating and Xylan last week, and that's enabled him to get everything together. So all the rear subframe parts went together. We'd got the diff back from Hauser Racing last week, so that's gone in. He was just rebuilding those coilovers last week. They've gone on. Front wishbones on. Essentially all of the suspension components together. Steering racks on at the front. So this is pretty much in a position where we can drop it down. These are temporary wheels. These are the wheels it came on. It is going on some very, very similar style wheels. We've gone with slightly different dimensions on them on the final wheels that are going to replace these ones, but the design is the same. We've also now been able to trial fit the 3D printed steering arms that Jonathan at PBE CNC modelled for us and machined. I think they look fine. I think we've just got to check the clearance on the brake caliper bracket, but as soon as we've verified that, we can pull the trigger on him machining the final items there. Yeah, and keep chipping away at it. So it's always, these builds always go in fits and starts, and it almost gets frustrating when you're chipping away at all these things behind the scenes, all these little bits of plating and powder coating and surface finishing and making of components and designing of components, and there's not much transformative progress, which almost feels frustrating at times. And then suddenly, because you've had all these things going on in the background, you get these sudden chunks where everything just comes together and suddenly it's rolling. And then that'll, a bit like Churchill's been at this stage seemingly for a long while, and then suddenly it'll have an interior in it, and there's always these big transformative phases. And I think the next one on this will be when we get all of the chrome parts and all the stainless steel trim parts back from Derby Plating, and then that'll be a massive transformative thing because we'll be able to get the glass in, we'll be able to get the bumpers on, we'll be able to get all the stainless stuff around the rear tailgate and the tailgate glass in, which really finishes off the shape of this car. So very excited to see the next big transformative phase on that. Allegro, James has been finishing off the last of the interior, which is carrying on with the rest of this week. So he's just doing the little trim panel in the cubby hole on the passenger side, glove box if you like, which was just needed to be made manually in situ to finish it off. And then he's going to leather the back panel of that, the little plates that go each side of the steering column shroud. All that dash can go completely together then, and he's going to fit the carpets, which he'd already done a while ago actually. We've just been holding fire because we didn't want to be in and out of the car a lot with the carpets in, but they're ready to go in, and that means we'll be completing the interior on that car. And then a couple of other things in the background on that. We were waiting for the idle air control valve mounting block to be machined and then anodized, which it's now been, so that can go on. And we've been waiting for a power steering pump to replace the faulty one that we originally had, which has also, I believe, just arrived. So we just need to wire that in, get that installed, and then we are ready to do some tentative test driving in that as well. So pretty awesome stuff all around here. We're going to skip the CAD den this week because Luke has been on the holiday of a lifetime, also taking in some cool car places, and George, in his own words, has been bitting and bobbing at a lot of different things, and would rather wait until next week and see some slightly more visually exciting work. So I'm going to hand straight over now to Nick at the den to see what's going on down there.
Thank you, Cal. Welcome back to the den. Hope you are all fabulous. I'm going to start with the Porsche. So the main thing on the Porsche that we've sorted out now, when the engine was at high RPM, the warning lights would come on the dash, like all of them. So my gut was that the alternator was not outputting sufficient amps. So the alternator had been played around with, there's evidence it had been played around with. So I sent that off to a specialist. They've got a rig, they can run them up, see what the output is. And they had a look, they took the back off, and it was an original Porsche Bosch unit, but they said that the regulator had been changed, and they'd, at some point when it had been changed, they damaged the casing, and they'd actually put the regulator back in with wood screws. So they ran it on their rig, and it was only outputting 80 amps instead of up to 120, which is what it should be. But because it had been badly repaired, it wasn't serviceable. So we've got a brand new one, and that has now sorted out that problem. The ABS light was remaining on, which is the brake light switch. So we're just waiting for a brake light switch to come, and we are pretty much there with the Porsche, which is fantastic. Quite a quick job for us in the relative scheme of things. So really pleased with that. Drives really, really well. Lovely thing, four-wheel drive and automatic. I wasn't really sure about it being auto, but actually it's a really good drive, and I can kind of understand the automatic version a little bit better now, because if you've got something you want to go, I don't know, say you go across Europe in, you just put your foot down in that, it's still blisteringly quick. Still quite analog, it's not very heavy, really good driving experience, and the seats in it, it's got different Recaro seats in it, really good, and I'd be very happy to blast down to the south of France in that at high speed if it was legal. MGB is back with us just for a few days, so the customer's been on a fantastic trip around Europe, a couple of 1,000 miles since we saw this last, down through France and Spain. Had a great time, so there's just a couple of little niggly, snaggly things that we're sorting out on this, which Luke is on with at the moment. The bus we talked about, that's all done and going back in a day or two. The CSL, Luke's little love partner in the workshop, so we have changed the bushes in the rear camber arms, and we freed up all the trailing arms to be able to do the tow and everything just while it was in the air, and then we've gone back on the alignment ramp, and we've done a four-wheel alignment on this, so that is all set up and it's all absolutely bob on in spec now, which is fantastic. Then the customer supplied us with a Blue Bus unit, which is like a standalone Bluetooth unit that plugs into the OE head unit. And then when you select the CD changer option, it basically gives you a Bluetooth function, so customer can then pair his phone with that. He can then use his telephone and obviously stream music and so on from his phone. So keeps the OE head unit, so car looks nice and standard, but you've got the Bluetooth functionality, which in today's world is kind of a good thing to have. The Lupo, so we've got all the bits for the Lupo, so this is coming back together nicely. We had a bit of a pause while waiting for some fabrication to be done. So we previously remounted the intercooler because we had a bigger radiator. So the intercooler had moved slightly, so we've made we had made a new charge cooler hard pipe, which goes from the intercooler exit up to the throttle body. So that's done. That's now fitted and painted. And at the same time, the fabricator made up a cat pipe for it because it didn't have a cat on it at all, and there was no provision for one, which is slightly unusual, but we won't go down that route. So we've got a cat on there now. And we have done the customer a decat pipe should he want that for any track or off-road use. And we are now ready, there's a couple of tiny things we're just going over, but we can basically send this on Monday, which will be tomorrow, for MOT. And then it's a case of There's couple of little bits and bobs, but basically the customer also wants us to estimate for some paint work. The front bumper's just quite worn and led a good life, I think is the best way of describing the front bumper. So we're going to look at getting the front bumper done, and the wings, because the wings had been rolled not very well, to be honest, and all the paint's cracked and it's a bit horrible. So we're going to look at sorting the wings out, painting the wings, and there's a tiny little bubble of rust on the driver's door, which we're going to estimate to sort out as well, and probably tie in the bonnet, because if we're doing the wings and the bumper, it's not a huge amount more work to do the bonnet, and actually the bonnet's in really good condition physically, but the paint is a bit battered on the front end, so we're going to include that as an option for the customer as well, to smarten that up. Customer's been talking about the wheels, so they're deciding at the moment whether to buy new wheels for it or to have these refurbished. They're not hugely expensive wheels, so it's kind of a 50-50 really. There's not much in it whether to get them refurbished or whether they buy new, so that's with the customer at the moment. No progress on the MG Metro at the moment, but we have got loads of progress on the Lexus. So we have now dropped the engine and gearbox out. We hadn't really planned to drop the engine and gearbox out, but we got to a point where we had so many other things either off the engine or out of the engine bay that we are changing and servicing, that we kind of got to a point where we were going to do the engine mounts as a matter of course, and we'd kind of looking at tidying up the front cross member with it on the car. We thought, well, there's not really a huge amount left just to drop the engine out, which then allows us access to change the exhaust manifolds that have integrated cats on them. It then becomes much easier to do the engine mounts. We can refinish the front cross member more easily. We were going to change the rear gearbox mount anyway. So actually from where we were, I think Owen dropped it all out in about 20 minutes, which all in all would have been, well, is quicker than then trying to do all those jobs separately while leaving the engine and gearbox in the car. So we've done that. So Owen's been working through organising parts to go for refinishing. And we've had a big delivery of new parts, all service items, and putting an estimate together at Lexus for some parts that we can't get aftermarket. So yes, loads of good progress on this, which is fantastic. Top secret project I can't talk about is also coming on really well. And I think that's about it from me. So I'm going to hand up to James. Have yourselves a very nice week and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Hi, welcome back to the trim shop. Fairly busy week this week. Finally caught up on most of the den work, so it's going to be more into the Retropower stuff this week and following on, I think. Week started with the Quattro, so I've done the B-pillars on that. Managed to climb into the back amongst all the roll cage and make some panels around the back windows. So that should tidy it all up nicely. I don't think they got a chance before to really finish it nicely, so this time it's all going to be leather and finished nice and some 3D printed parts in there. So that's going to look really smart. Then I think Jamie will cut now to, I was at Retropower yesterday, so I'm just finishing a few bits off for the Allegro dash. So we've made a little infill panel that's going to go in the pocket on the passenger side just to finish off a piece there. That should look really nice. Just finishes it off, just a bit where Richard couldn't quite get it round enough or something to do with that was, but it finishes it off nicely anyway. Yeah, and then I've just put the carpet in my car and I'm about to go over there and glue some of the carpet in, hopefully, if I'm not in the way. Churchill, so there's clips of me patterning the rear seats for Churchill finally. So yeah, cardboard pattern to start with, have a look at doing a few designs on there, see if that passes. Make a little bit for the parcel shelf, so hopefully get that cut out of wood, a few metal panels made, and some way of keeping it in place. And then yeah, we'll look at foaming that next week hopefully. And then I think Cal's going to speak about it more, but Irene, so we've decided on the steering wheel now. So it's going to be, from this section round, it's going to be blue, black and then back to blue. So that should look really smart. Brings the blue to the steering wheel. So yeah, we were trying to think of a design with the center in place because we didn't want to do the center blue. So this way, like the whole middle of the steering wheel will be black, and then yeah, blue around top and bottom. So that should look really nice. And then there's the wood, I think I'll probably speak more about, but got a few veneers here for her to pick from. So yeah, let's see which one she picks, and yeah, hopefully that will come together and I can finally finish it off because it's going to look brilliant with this colour. So yeah, I'll see you next week.
Thank you, James. Top stuff. That's all from us. So have yourselves a fun week and we'll see you next time. Bye.